Welcome to RPG Community College. My name is John Burgundy. I am the Dean of this prestigious institution. In this video, I would like to talk to you about the Tenebrous Depths in Pathfinder Kingmaker. The Tenebrous Depths are the dungeon that you find in the Beneath the Stolen Lands DLC, and I'm going to be giving you some tips and tricks to help you survive in this endless dungeon. And we're going to start with looking at character creation. This is going to be the first thing that you do in the DLC, and it's going to be the largest contributor to your success. Here we have the class selection. There's going to be a couple of things that you're going to want to take into consideration when you're building your party, like the fact that classes that are not gear dependent are going to have an easier time in the Tenebrous Depths. You're going to be able to buy +1 versions of most equipment at the Honest Guy, but any equipment more powerful than that is left completely to chance, and you can't guarantee that you're going to get it. So like a monk or a kineticist is going to be a very strong pick. To my knowledge, they were already strong in the main campaign, and in this game mode they're going to be that much stronger just because of their low equipment requirement. Arcane and Divine spellcasters are great as well. Most of their power comes from their spells and not really the equipment that they wear, so they're going to be a great choice too. Also, because you're going to be getting like 1 or 2 free rests on every level of the dungeon, classes that have renewable resources are going to be a lot more stronger than they are in the main campaign. Like alchemists were already a very strong class, but in the Tenebrous Depths they're even stronger because you're going to be constantly refilling their bombs multiple times on a floor. An Inquisitor, too, is much more useful in the Tenebrous Depths than they are in the main campaign. Their abilities like Bane and their judgments are going to be able to be used a lot more often, making them a lot stronger and funner to play. And all of your caster classes are going to constantly have their spells refilled, and you're just going to be able to spam them to your heart's content. Especially at later levels of the dungeon, you can just use them constantly. And if you are going to have an arcane spellcaster in your party, you should make sure to diversify the damage types that you have, because you're going to encounter floors where monsters have high resistances to like fire or ice or even acid. And if you run into a fire resistance area of the dungeon and the only damage dealing spells that you have deal fire damage, you're going to pretty much be useless. And it's also completely possible to run into a floor that has a bunch of elementals in it, and then they also have a resistance to a type of damage. So if you're going to be fighting like ancient water elementals that are also highly resistant to fire, you know, you're going to need like a acid or an electricity spell if you hope to contribute. So you're definitely going to want to diversify the damage types that you deal on your spellcasters. All in all, I think there's a lot of great choices here, and I think there's a lot of fun to be had just trying out new things. But now I'd like to talk about attributes and skills. Starting with charisma. If your character does not need charisma to be effective in combat, get rid of it. Charisma is by far the most useless stat that you can invest into in the Tenebrous Depths. There is not a single persuasion check to be made. This is a 100% combat focused DLC. So just get rid of as much charisma as you can and invest it into something more useful. The same is going to go for intelligence pretty much. Like if you don't need it to be effective in combat, just get rid of it. Well, to a certain extent, you'll need a certain amount to get the number of skill points that you're going to need. And it's going to be different depending on like the makeup of your team that you decide to go into the Tenebrous Depths with. But for the most part, in the setup that I've been using, I get rid of almost all the intelligence on most of my characters. The rest of the stats are going to be really useful. If I had any more tips related to the attributes, it would be invest into wisdom on every single character. Will saves are probably by far the most important saves that you're going to make in the Tenebrous Depths. There are a lot of encounters and creatures that are going to try to mind control your people and make them attack each other. And if you're going to be adding some melee characters into your party, having like 16 constitution, I'd say would be ideal. A lot of the monsters in the dungeon are going to be hitting you really hard, and you're not going to have the greatest gear to be able to pump that AC and like the enhancement bonuses for constitution. Like you can't always just rely on having that, so just being naturally tanky is going to be ideal. And moving on to skills, Athletics is completely useless. There isn't a single athletics check that you're going to have to make in the entire dungeon. Well, maybe. I mean, there are pit spells, and if you get caught in a pit spell, I think the athletics checks do help you get out of them, but I've been playing this DLC for around 100 hours now, and I've fallen into a pit maybe one time, just enough times to know that they exist, I guess. Mobility is also, for the most part, going to be completely useless. The only use for mobility is if you have a tanky character that's going to use the fighting defensively ability. If you get 3 points into mobility, it'll increase the dodge bonus to your AC to 3 instead of 2. Stealth is actually pretty useful. I end up using this a lot, actually. I run a rogue, and I use the rogue to stealth in ahead of everybody and look for traps and things like that, but also see like what enemies are in the room, like identify them, see their strengths, things like that. Just kind of gathering information before you go into a fight with a stealthy character is something that's going to do you a lot of good. Trickery is, of course, mandatory. You're going to need it to open up them locked chests, disarm traps. It's probably the most, well, actually the second most useful ability that you can have. Knowledge Arcana, Knowledge World, Lore Nature, and Lore Religion are all useful to have. Probably just one character, invest into them. You'd use these to inspect shrines that give your party buffs, and these vary in usefulness, but none of them are not useful, and most of them are actually pretty good, and you're going to want to have at least one character for each of these skills. And Perception is something I take on every single one of my characters. Perception is by far the most useful ability. Trickery would definitely be a close second, but Perception is going to allow you to see all those traps that you need to disarm, find those treasure chests that you need to pick lock, and also be made aware of any hidden walls. And there's always a good amount of loot or some extra enemies that you can fight behind those hidden walls that are pretty valuable. Persuasion is absolutely useless. If you're not running a Dazzling Display build, there's absolutely no need for Persuasion. Use Magic Device is pretty useful. You do find some nice wands, like Wands of Haste and things like that. Also, like if you don't want to run a Cleric, having 2 people that know use Magic Device so that you can use Scrolls of Resurrection is going to save your ass. So it's gonna be useful to have 1 or 2 characters in every setup that know use Magic Device. And that's kind of all the general tips that I have for character creation. Everything else is going to be much more dependent on the classes that you're going to be choosing. So let's start talking about the actual dungeon and some of the more dangerous things that you're going to be seeing down in the Tenebrous depths. Some of the most dangerous floors that you're going to run into are actually probably your first couple of floors. There's a couple of reasons for this, but the main reason is that your party just is not going to be that strong. Like everybody is going to be level 1, so there's kind of just a lot more randomness involved. And with Pathfinder buffing the enemies up a lot, it can get pretty rippy. And by far, the enemies in the beginning that I've had the most trouble with are going to be goblins. I've noticed that there are 3 different kind of groups of enemies that you run into in the first couple of levels. You can get kobolds, mites, or goblins. Goblins are the worst because they have a natural like dex bonus, which bumps their AC up, making them like really hard to hit. You could run into a goblin that has 21 AC on the first floor, and good luck hitting him when you only have like a +3 to hit. And I've actually walked into the dungeon, entered into my first combat, and got crit right off the bat for 35 damage, and it just instantly killed one of my characters. And this was on the challenging difficulty. So to say there's a little bit of randomness involved in getting past the first couple levels is, well, it's pretty true. You're going to need a little bit of luck. But the best way that I've found to deal with the goblins is just to use abilities that automatically hit, like having a mage in the party and just spamming magic missile on them, or having an alchemist and just chucking bombs at them. These work really well. You do have a little bit of gold left over after buying mercenaries in the beginning, and you could invest into some alchemist fire. This actually deals 2d6 damage, which really isn't that bad for level 1 and 2. They can kind of be useful. Past the beginning of the dungeon though, The most dangerous thing that you're going to encounter is definitely the enemies that mind control you. Like I said when I was talking about the attributes, you're just going to want to get your will saves up as high as you can. There's really the only way to counter this, because like getting your rogue mind controlled and then having him murder your entire party isn't fun. Besides the mind control or dominate, whatever you want to call it. Another annoying thing you're going to have to deal with is paralyze. There are certain monsters, I think that's the Duragar druids. They're going to cast a spell, I think it's called Vine Trap. This is going to paralyze you, so you're going to need a divine caster with remove paralysis, or have some remove paralysis scrolls waiting to go. I've lost a run to both of my frontline people getting paralyzed, and then my backline just getting overrun. It sucks. Make sure you have a way to get rid of that paralysis. Other than all of that though, I can't really think of too many other things. Like, besides the things I just mentioned, as long as you're using resist energy and protection from energy and delay poison, you should be fine. If you got a properly built party and you keep in mind some of the things I just went over, you should be able to conquer the Tenebrous Depths, or at least make it to floor 20 and kill the adventurer that's in the dungeon. So that's going to be all for this video, and I hope you learned a thing or two. If you'd like to continue your education, enrollment is free. All you have to do is like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. I wish you the best of luck in all of your endeavors, and I hope to see you again soon.